Welcome to World of Sleepcraft, where the rich and wonderful lore of Azeroth becomes your gateway to peaceful rest. Tonight, we journey through the complete story of Illidan Stormrage, the Betrayer, one of the most complex and tragic figures in all of Warcraft history. From his birth under prophetic golden eyes through 10,000 years of imprisonment, from his transformation into a demon hunter to his ultimate role as the jailer of Sargeras himself, this is a tale that spans the ages. Settle in, get comfortable, and let this epic story of sacrifice, redemption, and the eternal struggle against darkness unfold before you. Let your surroundings fade away as we begin this journey across time and space, through moments of triumph and tragedy, through battles that shook the cosmos, and quiet moments of solitude in a prison cell beneath a mountain. This is a story of extraordinary scope, covering events that stretch from the dawn of Night Elf civilization to the final confrontation with the Burning Legion at the edge of reality itself. Take a deep breath, let it out slowly, and allow the tale to carry you into peaceful rest. The story of Illidan Stormrage is one that defies simple categorization. He has been called hero and villain, savior and betrayer, demon and champion. Throughout his impossibly long life, spanning more than 15,000 years, Illidan has made choices that saved his world and doomed his people, that earned him eternal imprisonment and ultimate redemption. To understand Illidan is to understand the very nature of sacrifice, the terrible burden of seeing what others cannot, and the loneliness of walking a path that no one else can follow. His tale touches on themes that resonate across all cultures and all times. The rivalry between siblings, the pain of unrequited love, the willingness to sacrifice everything for a greater cause, the question of whether terrible means can be justified by righteous ends. These are universal struggles, and Illidan embodies them in ways that speak to something deep within us all. He is not merely a character in a story, but a reflection of the choices we all face, magnified to cosmic proportions. Born in the ancient times before the Great Sundering, when the Night Elves ruled an empire that spanned a single massive continent, Illidan came into the world alongside his twin brother Malfurion. The circumstances of their birth were unremarkable by most standards, yet Illidan bore a sign that set him apart from the moment he opened his eyes. His eyes glowed with a golden light, an extraordinarily rare trait among the night elves of that era. Such golden eyes were seen perhaps once in a generation, and they were universally regarded as a portent of greatness, a sign that the bear was destined for remarkable achievements. The night elves of ancient Kalimdor lived in a society deeply connected to arcane magic. At the heart of their civilization lay the Well of Eternity, a vast lake of shimmering magical energy that served as the source of their power, their immortality, and their connection to the natural world. The Night Elves had built their entire culture around the well, drawing upon its energies to fuel their spells, extend their lifespans, and shape the world according to their will. Queen Azshara, the most beautiful and powerful of all night elves, ruled from her palace at the center of this empire, surrounded by her elite highborn sorcerers who devoted themselves to the study of arcane magic. Illidan and Malfurion grew up in this world of wonder and power, though their paths would diverge dramatically as they matured. Both brothers showed exceptional talent, but their gifts manifested in very different ways. Malfurion possessed an innate connection to the natural world, a sensitivity to the spirits of the wild that would eventually lead him to become the first druid under the tutelage of the demigod Sargeras. Illidan, by contrast, showed remarkable aptitude for arcane magic, the very force that powered their civilization. He could manipulate magical energies with an ease that impressed even the high-born masters, and he absorbed knowledge of the arcane arts with voracious intensity. Yet despite his prodigious talent, Illidan could not escape the shadow of his brother's destiny. While Malfurion walked the path of druidism, learning to commune with the Emerald Dream and channel the powers of nature itself, Illidan remained devoted to arcane magic, a pursuit that was beginning to fall out of favor as some night elves grew concerned about the dangers of drawing too heavily upon the well of eternity. Illidan felt the sting of being overlooked, of watching his brother receive the admiration and respect that he believed his own golden eyes had promised him at birth. Adding to Illidan's frustration was the matter of Tyrande Whisperwind. She was a priestess of Elune, devoted to the moon goddess, who watched over the night elves, and she was the most beautiful woman Illidan had ever seen. From the moment he first watched her dance at a festival, her silver hair flowing like moonlight as she moved with ethereal grace, Illidan knew that he loved her. He also knew with bitter certainty that his brother loved her too, and worst of all, he knew that Tyrande's heart had turned toward Malfurion, not toward him. This unrequited love would become one of the defining elements of Illidan's character, a wound that never truly healed even across 10,000 years. He did not hate his brother for Tyrande's choice, not exactly, but there was always a part of him that wondered what might have been different, what he might have done to win her heart. In his darker moments, Illidan convinced himself that if he could only prove himself worthy, if he could only achieve something truly remarkable, Tyrande would finally see him as he wished to be seen. This desire to prove himself, to earn recognition and love through extraordinary deeds, would drive many of his most consequential decisions. The brothers studied under Sargeras, the ancient demigod who dwelt in the forests of Kalimdor. For Malfurion, these lessons were a revelation, opening doorways to powers and perspectives that transformed his understanding of the world. For Illidan, they were an exercise in frustration. He had no gift for druidism, no natural connection to the wild spirits that his brother befriended so easily. His power lay in the arcane, in the manipulation of raw magical energy, and Sargeras's teachings seemed designed to deny him the very things he excelled at. Illidan grew increasingly resentful during this period, though he tried to hide his feelings from those around him. He watched Malfurion advance through his druidic training with something approaching jealousy, even as he continued to hone his own arcane abilities in private. The golden-eyed night elf was determined to find his own path to greatness, even if it meant walking alone. There were moments of closeness between the brothers, times when the bond of their shared blood seemed stronger than the differences that divided them. They would hunt together in the forests of Kalimdor, tracking prey through the ancient trees, working as a team in ways that reminded them of their childhood. During these hunts, Illidan could almost forget his resentment, could almost accept that their paths were simply different rather than one being superior to the other. Tyrande would sometimes join them on these excursions, and those were the hardest times for Illidan. He would watch her laugh at something Malfurion said, would see the way her eyes lit up when his brother was near, and he would feel his heart crack a little more. Yet he never spoke of his pain, never let either of them see how much it cost him to watch the woman he loved choose another. Pride kept him silent, pride and the desperate hope that somehow, someday, things might change. The years before the Legion's arrival were a golden age for the Night Elves, though they did not know it at the time. The Well of Eternity provided seemingly limitless power, the forests teemed with life, and Queen Ashara's rule brought a stability that allowed art and culture to flourish. Looking back from the perspective of 10,000 years, Illidan would remember those days with a mixture of nostalgia and regret. So much had been lost, not just to the Sundering, but to the choices that followed. The world of his youth was gone forever, destroyed as much by his own actions as by the demons who had invaded. The Night Elf civilization of ancient Kalimdor had reached heights of magical achievement that would never be equaled again. The Well of Eternity sat at the heart of this empire, like a beating heart of pure power, its waters shimmering with energies drawn from the great dark beyond itself. The Night Elves had long believed that the well was a gift from the Titans, those ancient beings who had shaped the world in ages past, and they had built their entire society around the privilege of accessing its power. Queen Ashara ruled this empire from her palace at the shores of the well, surrounded by the Highborn, an elite caste of night elves who had devoted themselves entirely to the study and manipulation of arcane magic. The Highborn believed themselves superior to their common kin, blessed with greater sensitivity to magical energies, and therefore more deserving of the power that flowed from the well. They spent their days conducting elaborate experiments, pushing the boundaries of what arcane magic could achieve, always seeking greater power, greater knowledge, greater control. The common night elves, those who were not counted among the highborn, lived in a society that was both beautiful and deeply stratified. They built their cities in harmony with the forests, cultivated moonwell gardens that captured starlight and moonlight for various purposes, and worshipped Elune, the moon goddess who watched over their people. Many served as warriors, as craftsmen, as priests and priestesses, while the highborn pursued their magical researches with ever-increasing ambition. Illidan observed this society with complex feelings. His arcane talent would have qualified him for acceptance among the highborn had he wished to pursue that path. Yet something held him back, perhaps his connection to Tyrande and Malfurion, perhaps some instinct that warned him about the path the highborn were walking. He remained on the edges of both worlds, too talented for common night elf society, yet unwilling to fully embrace the highborn's increasingly reckless magical experimentation. The Well of Eternity was more than a source of power. It was a beacon, broadcasting its energies across the vast distances of the cosmos. The night elves did not understand what they were advertising, did not comprehend that their magical achievements were drawing attention from beings far older and far more dangerous than anything they had ever imagined. In the depths of the twisting nether, the chaotic realm between worlds, dark eyes turned toward Azeroth and saw the brilliant light of the Well of Eternity shining like a lighthouse in an ocean of darkness. Sargeras, the Dark Titan, had once been the champion of the Pantheon, the order of godlike beings who had shaped worlds across the cosmos. He had been tasked with combating the forces of chaos and destruction, with protecting the ordered universe from the demons of the twisting nether and the insidious corruption of the void. But his endless war against these forces had shown him something that shattered his faith in the Pantheon's mission. He had seen the truth of the Void Lords, the incomprehensible entities that sought to corrupt world souls and use them to unmake reality itself. Faced with this horror, Sargeras had made a terrible choice. If the Void Lords would corrupt all life to serve their entropic goals, then all life must be destroyed before they could succeed. Better a clean death than an eternity of twisted corruption. Sargeras turned against the Pantheon, slew his fellow Titans, and began assembling an army that would become known as the Burning Legion. Demons beyond counting flocked to his banner, drawn by his power and his purpose. The Legion would scour the universe clean of life, denying the Void Lords their victory by ensuring there was nothing left for them to corrupt. The light of the Well of Eternity reached Sargeras, and he saw in it an opportunity. Here was a world rich with life, powered by energies that could serve his Legion's purposes. And more importantly, here was a potential gateway, a means by which he himself could enter the physical universe and personally oversee the destruction of Azeroth. He reached out across the infinite distances, his consciousness touching the minds of those who dwelt around the well, seeking servants who would prepare the way for his coming. Queen Ashara and her chief advisor Xavius were the first to hear Sargeras' whispers. The Dark Titan appeared to them as a god of unimaginable power, promising them everything they had ever desired. To Ashara, he offered dominion over a remade world, a paradise sculpted to match her perfect beauty. To Xavius, he offered magical knowledge beyond anything the Highborn had ever discovered. Neither understood the true nature of their new master. Neither comprehended that Sargeras intended to destroy everything they loved, that his promises were lies designed to manipulate them into opening the doorway for the Burning Legion's invasion. The Highborn began working in secret, channeling the power of the Well of Eternity to create a portal that would allow the Legion to enter Azeroth. They told themselves that they were preparing for a new age of glory, that the beings they were summoning would elevate Night Elf civilization to heights beyond imagining. In truth, they were dooming their world to fire and destruction, inviting an army of demons whose sole purpose was annihilation. The first signs of the invasion came as unexplained disappearances, as villages along the edges of Night Elf territory went silent overnight. Scouts sent to investigate found scenes of horrifying carnage, bodies torn apart by claws and fangs, buildings burned to ash by failfire. Something terrible had come to Kalimdor, something that killed without mercy and left nothing but devastation in its wake. The demons of the Burning Legion poured through the portal that the Highborn had created, emerging into the world in ever-increasing numbers. Felguard warriors with their massive axes, fellhounds that could smell magic and tracked spellcasters with relentless determination, infernals that fell from the sky like meteors and burned everything they touched. The Night Elves had never faced anything like this enemy, had never imagined that such creatures could exist. Their initial response was confusion, then terror, then desperate defense as they realized that their civilization faced extinction. Illidan was among those who took up arms against the invaders. Whatever his frustrations with his place in Night Elf society, whatever his resentment toward his brother, he loved his people and would not stand idle while demons slaughtered them. He joined the resistance that formed around Lord Ravencrest, the master of Blackrook Hold and one of the most powerful military leaders among the Night Elves. Alongside his brother Malfurion and the priestess Tyrande, Illidan fought in the desperate battles that marked the early days of the War of the Ancients. The resistance was hopelessly outmatched. The demons were stronger, faster, and more numerous than anything the Night Elves could field against them. Worse still, the Night Elves did not understand the nature of their enemy, did not know that the Burning Legion's forces were effectively infinite, that killing demons only sent them back to the twisting nether, where they would eventually reform and return. For every demon they slew, a dozen more seemed to take its place. The war was not a war at all, but a slow extermination. Illidan distinguished himself in these early battles, his arcane power proving devastatingly effective against the demonic invaders. He could call down storms of magical energy that incinerated ranks of Felguard warriors, could shield his allies with barriers of force that turned aside the demon's attacks. Yet even as he fought, Illidan was thinking, calculating, looking for some way to turn the tide of the war. He could see that conventional tactics would not be enough, that the Night Elves would eventually be overwhelmed by sheer numbers if something did not change. The siege of Blackrook Hold was one of the most desperate engagements of the war. The fortress, perched atop a mountain in the heart of Night Elf territory, served as the primary command center for the resistance. Demon forces surrounded it in overwhelming numbers, waves of attacks crashing against the walls like the tide against a cliff. Lord Ravencrest commanded the defense, but it was clear to everyone that the hold could not stand indefinitely. It was during this siege that Illidan made a choice that would forever change his destiny. The Moon Guard, the elite spellcasters who served as the Night Elves' magical artillery, were being overwhelmed by the demon assault. Their barriers were failing, their offensive spells proving inadequate against the Legion's might. Illidan saw an opportunity, a way to channel the Moon Guard's power into a devastating strike that could break the siege, but it would require them to push beyond their limits, to draw more deeply on their magical reserves than was safe. Illidan proposed his plan to Lord Ravencrest, explaining that the Moon Guard could create a spell of immense destructive power, enough to annihilate the demon army besieging the hold. He did not mention, or perhaps chose not to emphasize, that the spell would likely kill most of the mages who cast it. The magical energies required were simply too great for mortal bodies to channel safely. Lord Ravencrest, desperate to save his fortress and his people, approved the plan. The spell worked. Arcane fire swept across the demon army, incinerating thousands of Legion soldiers in an instant. The siege of Blackrook Hold was broken, the Night Elf resistance preserved to fight another day. But the cost was terrible. Dozens of Moonguard mages burned out their own life forces in the casting, their bodies crumbling to ash as the spell consumed them. Lord Ravencrest was horrified when he learned the full price of victory, but Illidan remained unmoved. He had saved the hold, saved the resistance, saved countless Night Elf lives. What were a few dozen mages compared to that? This incident revealed something fundamental about Illidan's character. He was willing to make sacrifices that others could not countenance, willing to pay prices that others refused to consider. He saw the war in mathematical terms, in costs and benefits, in acceptable losses and strategic gains. If 100 night elves had to die to save 1,000, Illidan would make that trade without hesitation. If terrible means were required to achieve righteous ends, Illidan would employ those means, while others hesitated. The other leaders of the resistance looked at Illidan differently after Black Rook Hold. Some saw a brilliant tactician who had saved them from destruction. Others saw a dangerous fanatic who would sacrifice his own people without remorse. Malfurion watched his brother with growing concern, sensing that Illidan was walking a path that led somewhere dark. Tyrande prayed for Illidan's soul, hoping that the light of Elune would guide him back from the edge. But Illidan was already too far gone for prayers, already committed to doing whatever was necessary to defeat the Legion, regardless of the cost to himself or others. The War of the Ancients raged across Kalimdor, and despite the Night Elves' desperate resistance, the Burning Legion continued to advance. The portal at the Well of Eternity grew larger with each passing day, allowing more and more demons to pour into Azeroth. The Highborn, now fully committed to Sargeras' cause, worked ceaselessly to stabilize and expand the gateway, preparing for the moment when the Dark Titan himself would stride through and claim this world for the Legion. Illidan watched the progress of the war with growing desperation. The resistance was fighting bravely, but bravery alone could not overcome the Legion's infinite numbers. Even the intervention of the wild gods, ancient beings of tremendous power who allied with the Night Elves, was not enough to turn the tide. Something more was needed, some stroke of genius or fortune that could break the Legion's stranglehold on the war. It was in this moment of despair that Sargeras reached out to Illidan. The Dark Titan had been observing the young Night Elf, had seen his exceptional magical talent and his willingness to make sacrifices that others refused. Here was a potential asset, a tool that could be used to accelerate the Legion's victory. Sargeras whispered to Illidan in dreams and visions, showing him glimpses of power beyond anything the Night Elf had imagined, promising him the strength to defeat the Legion and save his people. Illidan was not foolish enough to trust Sargeras completely. He understood that the Dark Titan was his enemy, that the promises being made were designed to manipulate him. But Illidan also saw an opportunity. If he could pretend to serve Sargeras, if he could gain access to the Highborn's inner circle and learn the secrets of their portal, he might find a way to destroy it from within. He would become a spy, infiltrating the enemy's ranks while remaining loyal to his people in his heart. The decision to accept Sargeras' offer was not made lightly. Illidan knew that if he joined the Highborn, he would be seen as a traitor by everyone he loved. His brother would despise him. Tyrande would be horrified. Lord Ravencrest would call for his execution. But Illidan believed that the potential gain outweighed the personal cost. If he could learn how to close the portal, if he could find the weakness in the Legion's invasion plan, then his people might yet survive. Sargeras was pleased by Illidan's acceptance. As a sign of favor, the Dark Titan offered to grant Illidan greater power, power that would set him apart from all other Night Elves and mark him as Sargeras' chosen servant. Illidan accepted, and Sargeras' fell fire burned away his eyes, replacing them with orbs of green flame that could see magic itself. The gift was painful beyond description. The sensation of having his eyes destroyed and remade by demonic energy was a trauma that Illidan would never fully recover from. But when the transformation was complete, Illidan possessed a form of vision that no other mortal had ever experienced. With his new eyes, Illidan could perceive the flows of magical energy that permeated the world. He could see the ley lines that crisscrossed Kalimdor, the currents of arcane power that fed the well of eternity. He could see the fell corruption that marked the demons, the holy light that surrounded the priests of Elune, the natural energies that Malfurion channeled as a druid. Nothing magical was hidden from him. Nothing arcane could escape his burning gaze. Illidan joined the Highborn at the Well of Eternity, presenting himself as a defector from the Resistance. Xavius and the other servants of Sargeras welcomed him, pleased to have acquired such a talented ally. They did not suspect that Illidan's loyalty was false, that he was studying their work not to assist it, but to discover how to destroy it. Illidan played his part well, hiding his true intentions behind a mask of eager service, while he learned everything he could about the portal and its weaknesses. The knowledge he gained was sobering. The portal was not simply a magical construct that could be disrupted with the right spell. It was tied directly to the Well of Eternity itself, drawing upon the well's infinite energies to maintain and expand its connection to the twisting nether. To close the portal permanently would require destroying the well, and destroying the well would require power that Illidan could not imagine. Yet Illidan did not despair. He continued his infiltration, continued learning, continued waiting for an opportunity. And while he waited, he began to formulate a plan of his own, a contingency for what might happen after the war was won. The Well of Eternity was the source of the Night Elves' immortality, the foundation of their civilization. But it was also a beacon that had attracted the Legion to Azeroth in the first place. If the well was destroyed in the process of defeating the Legion, the Night Elves would lose their source of power forever, unless someone preserved a portion of that power for the future. Illidan began secretly collecting vials of water from the Well of Eternity, storing them away against the day when they might be needed. He told himself that this was preparation, that he was ensuring his people would not be left powerless after the war. But there was another motivation as well, one that Illidan did not fully acknowledge even to himself. The golden-eyed night elf had always craved power, had always sought to prove himself worthy of the destiny his birth had promised. The waters of the well were power in its purest form, and some part of Illidan could not bear to see that power destroyed completely. The final battle of the War of the Ancients took place at the Well of Eternity itself. The Night Elf resistance, bolstered by allies from across Azeroth, and even by visitors from other timelines whose presence had been arranged by the bronze dragon Nosdormu, launched a desperate assault on the Highborn's stronghold. Their goal was to disrupt the portal before Sargeras himself could cross over, to end the invasion while there was still a world left to save. Illidan fought alongside his brother and the other champions of the Resistance in this final confrontation. His cover among the Highborn was no longer necessary. and he was more than ready to reveal his true allegiance. The information he had gathered during his infiltration proved invaluable, allowing the resistance to bypass defenses and strike at targets that would otherwise have been impossible to reach. The battle at the well was chaos incarnate. Demons and night elves fought in the shallows of the magical lake, their blood mixing with waters that shimmered with cosmic energy. The dragon aspects battled against pit lords and doom guards, while mortal heroes clashed with the elite of the Legion's forces. Above it all, the portal crackled with power, the gateway through which Sargeras was attempting to force his way into the physical world. The Dark Titan's efforts to cross over were nearly successful. His hand, a massive appendage larger than mountains, reached through the portal and grasped at the world beyond. If Sargeras had completed his passage, if his entire form had entered Azeroth, nothing would have stopped him from crushing the resistance and claiming the world for the Legion. The heroes of the Night Elf resistance knew that they had to act immediately, that there would be no second chances. Malfurion Stormrage led the ritual that would close the portal. Drawing upon his druidic powers and the aid of the dragon aspects, he began to disrupt the magical energies that sustained the gateway. The Well of Eternity, already destabilized by the portal's presence, began to collapse in upon itself. The implosion that resulted was unlike anything Azeroth had ever witnessed, a cataclysm that reshaped the very face of the world. The Great Sundering, as this disaster came to be known, tore ancient Kalimdor apart. The single supercontinent that had housed the Night Elf Empire shattered into multiple landmasses, separated by vast expanses of newly formed ocean. Millions perished in the catastrophe, swallowed by the sea or destroyed by the magical energies that tore the world asunder. The Well of Eternity itself was destroyed, its waters consumed by the implosion that closed the portal and cast Sargeras back into the twisting nether. The Legion's invasion had been stopped, but at a terrible cost. The Night Elf civilization was shattered, their population decimated, their cities destroyed. Those who survived found themselves on scattered remnants of land, cut off from each other by miles of treacherous ocean. The world they had known was gone forever, replaced by something smaller, darker, and far less magical. In the aftermath of the Sundering, as survivors gathered on the largest remaining landmass that would come to be known as Northern Kalimdor, Illidan made his move. He had hidden the vials of well water throughout the chaos of the final battle, preserving them against the possibility of exactly this outcome. Now, atop Mount Hyjal, at the heart of the Night Elves' new homeland, Illidan poured those vials into a small mountain lake. The effect was immediate. The waters of the lake began to glow with the same energy that had characterized the Well of Eternity, transforming the mundane body of water into a new well of power. Illidan had recreated the source of the Night Elves' power, had ensured that his people would not be left without magic in the dark days ahead. In his mind, he had performed a great service, had guaranteed the survival of everything that made the Night Elves who they were. Malfurion did not see it that way. When he discovered what his brother had done, his reaction was one of horror and fury. The original Well of Eternity had attracted the Legion to Azeroth in the first place. By creating a new well, Illidan had potentially doomed them to face another invasion, had risked everything they had just sacrificed so much to prevent. The brothers confronted each other at the shores of the new well, their argument echoing across the devastated landscape. Illidan tried to explain his reasoning. He spoke of preserving power for future generations, of ensuring that the Night Elves would not become weak and vulnerable in a dangerous world. He argued that with proper precautions, the new well could be hidden from the Legion's attention, that its benefits outweighed its risks. But Malfurion was in no mood to listen to justifications. The elders of the Night Elves gathered to pass judgment on Illidan's actions. The debate was heated, with some arguing that Illidan had indeed performed a valuable service, and others demanding his execution for reckless endangerment of their entire species. In the end, a compromise was reached that satisfied no one but prevented further bloodshed. Illidan would not be executed, but neither would he be allowed to remain free. He had proven himself too dangerous, too willing to take unilateral action that could doom the entire world. From this day forward, Illidan Stormrage would be imprisoned beneath Mount Highjall, confined to a barrow prison where he could not threaten anyone with his reckless pursuit of power. His sentence would have no end date. He would remain imprisoned until the elders decided he had been sufficiently reformed, a decision that many suspected would never come. The pronouncement of this sentence was witnessed by Tyrande, who stood with Malfurion as the judgment was rendered. Her expression was a mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness that someone she had once cared for would be condemned to such a fate, relief that the danger he represented would be contained. She met Illidan's burning eyes one final time as he was led away, and in that moment, something passed between them that neither would ever speak of. Perhaps it was farewell. Perhaps it was a silent acknowledgement that their paths, once so closely intertwined, would now diverge forever. The new well of eternity was not destroyed, as some had demanded. The dragon aspects, summoned by Malfurion to witness the aftermath of the sundering, debated the matter among themselves before reaching a conclusion. Alexstrasza, the Lifebinder, argued that the well's power could benefit all of Azeroth if properly channeled. Ysera the Dreamer suggested that the well could serve as an anchor for the Emerald Dream. In the end, the aspects agreed that the well should be preserved, but protected. Nosdormu, the Timeless One, planted a single enchanted acorn in the waters of the new well. From this seed grew Nordrassil, the World Tree, a massive living monument that would serve both as a guardian of the well and as a symbol of the Night Elves' new covenant with nature. The tree's roots drew upon the well's energies, channeling them throughout the world in ways that strengthened the land rather than corrupting it. Its branches reached toward the sky, connecting the material world to the Emerald Dream that Ysera had shown to Malfurion. The dragon aspects blessed the World Tree with gifts that would protect both it and the Night Elves. Nosdormu blessed them with endless lifespans, so long as the tree stood. Alexstrasza blessed the tree with growth and resilience, ensuring it would flourish for ages to come. Ysera linked the tree to the Emerald Dream, creating a pathway between the waking world and the realm of nature's spirits. These blessings came with a price, a promise that the Night Elves would serve as guardians of the natural world, but it was a price they were willing to pay. The Night Elves established their new civilization around this tree, building settlements in its shadow and throughout the forests of northern Kalimdor. They swore never to repeat the mistakes that had led to the sundering, never to reach for power beyond their ability to control. The arcane magic that had once been central to their society was banned, replaced by the druidic practices that Malfurion had learned from Cenarius and the priesthood of Elune that Tyrande would come to lead. As for Illidan, he was led in chains to the Barrow prison that would be his home for the next 10,000 years. The prison was constructed specifically to hold him, its wards designed by the most powerful mages, remaining among the Night Elves. It was buried deep beneath Mount Hejal, isolated from the magical energies of the World Tree, cut off from any source of power that Illidan might use to escape. His jailer would be Maiev Shadowsong, a Night Elf warrior who had distinguished herself in the War of the Ancients and who harbored a deep hatred for the betrayer. She had lost friends to the Legion's invasion, had watched companions die because of the war that Illidan's creation of the new well might eventually provoke again. In her eyes, Illidan was not merely a criminal, but a monster, a threat that should have been eliminated rather than imprisoned. Maiev and her watchers would guard Illidan's cell for millennia, ensuring that he could never escape to threaten their people again. They built an organization dedicated solely to this purpose, training generation after generation of night elves in the arts of imprisonment and pursuit. The Watchers became an order unto themselves, isolated from the rest of night elf society, devoted entirely to the task of keeping Illidan contained. The darkness of Illidan's cell was absolute. No light penetrated the stone walls. No sound reached him from the world above. He was alone in a way that few beings had ever experienced, cut off from everything and everyone he had ever known, condemned to spend eternity in a prison that seemed designed to drive him mad. The first centuries were the hardest. Illidan raged against his captivity, hurling himself against the walls of his cell, screaming curses at his brother and the elders who had condemned him. He tried to use his magic to escape, but the prison had been specifically designed to contain someone of his power. The wards that bound it were nearly unbreakable, and without access to external sources of magical energy, Illidan could not generate enough force to overcome them. Time passed differently in the darkness. Without the cycle of day and night, without any external markers to track the passage of hours and days, Illidan lost all sense of how long he had been imprisoned. He tried to count heartbeats, to mark time by his own biological rhythms, but eventually even that failed him. He simply existed in an eternal present, unchanging and unchangeable. Maiev Shadowsong visited occasionally, though whether her visits were frequent or rare, Illidan could not tell. She seemed to take pleasure in reminding him of his crimes, in describing the flourishing civilization that his people had built while he rotted in his cell. Illidan developed a deep hatred for his jailer during these visits, a loathing that would eventually become almost as much a part of his identity as his hatred for the Legion. The centuries stretched into millennia. Illidan's body did not age, sustained by the magical energies that pervaded even this lightless prison, but his mind changed in ways that would have been invisible to any observer. He had nothing to do but think, nothing to contemplate but his own choices and their consequences. He relived the War of the Ancients 1,000 times in his memory, analyzing every decision, every battle, every moment when things might have gone differently. He thought about Tyrande constantly. Her face was the clearest image in his memory, preserved with a vividness that time could not diminish. He wondered what she was doing, whether she was happy, whether she ever thought about him. He knew that she had chosen Malfurion, that they were together in the world above, while he languished alone in the darkness. The knowledge was a constant ache, a wound that never healed. Illidan's feelings about his imprisonment were complex. He believed that he had been treated unjustly, that his actions in creating the new well had been motivated by noble intentions and should have been recognized as such. At the same time, some small part of him understood why the night elves had feared him, why they had chosen imprisonment over trust. He had proven himself willing to take extreme actions without consulting others, to make decisions that affected everyone without seeking their consent. Whether his intentions were good or evil, his methods made him dangerous. The millennia passed, and the world changed in ways that Illidan could not perceive. The night elves built their civilization, developed their druidic practices, and gradually withdrew from the affairs of the younger races that were beginning to emerge across Azeroth. The High Elves split from their kin and founded a kingdom in the Eastern Kingdoms, creating their own source of magical power called the Sunwell. Trolls and humans and dwarves rose and fell, kingdoms were founded and destroyed, wars were fought and forgotten. Through it all, Illidan waited in his cell, unchanging while the world transformed around him. His mind turned inward, developing depths of contemplation that few beings ever achieved. He meditated on the nature of power, on the relationship between means and ends, on the question of what he would do differently if he were ever given a second chance. He did not expect that chance to come, but he prepared for it nonetheless. 10,000 years is an almost incomprehensible span of time. Illidan lived through it second by second, breath by breath, thought by thought. When his imprisonment finally ended, he emerged as something different from the night elf who had been condemned all those millennia ago. The intervening years had not broken him, but they had changed him in ways that would not become apparent until later. He was harder, colder, more ruthless than he had been before. The capacity for sacrifice that had distinguished him during the War of the Ancients had become something more extreme, a willingness to do anything, to pay any price, to achieve his goals. The darkness had not defeated Illidan Stormrage, but it had forged him into something new, something that the world was not prepared to face. During those long millennia, Illidan dreamed. His dreams were vivid and terrible, filled with images of demonic armies sweeping across Azeroth, of worlds burning in fell fire, of Sargeras sitting enthroned atop the ashes of everything Illidan had ever loved. These were not mere nightmares, but visions, glimpses of a possible future that Illidan knew he must prevent. The Legion had not given up on Azeroth. They would return, and when they did, someone would need to stand against them. Illidan used his dreams as fuel for his planning. In his mind, he fought countless battles against the Legion, testing strategies and tactics that might prove effective. He analyzed his memories of the War of the Ancients, identifying mistakes that had been made and ways they might be avoided in future conflicts. He contemplated the nature of demonic power, understanding it in ways that no other night elf could, and he began to formulate theories about how that power might be turned against its wielders. The Barrow prison was designed to prevent escape, not to prevent thought. Illidan's captors had underestimated how dangerous a genius could be with nothing but time to think. By the time his imprisonment ended, Illidan had developed strategies for fighting demons that would prove devastatingly effective. He had worked out the basic principles of demon hunting, the technique of absorbing demonic energy and using it against the source. He had even begun to understand how a mortal might transform themselves into something capable of matching a demon's power. All he needed was the opportunity to put his theories into practice. The Burning Legion returned to Azeroth 10,000 years after the War of the Ancients, and once again, the world trembled before the onslaught of demonic forces. This invasion, which would come to be known as the Third War, began with a plague that swept through the human kingdoms of Lordaeron, transforming the living into undead servants of the Lich King. The Scourge, as this undead army was called, was merely the vanguard of a larger demonic invasion, a tool created by the Legion to weaken Azeroth's defenses before the main assault. The Night Elves had isolated themselves from the rest of the world for millennia, content to tend their forests and maintain their vigil over the world tree Nordrassil. But the Third War could not be ignored, even by the most isolationist of their leaders. The Legion's forces were advancing on Mount Hajal, threatening the very heart of Night Elf civilization. If the world tree fell, the new Well of Eternity would be exposed, and the disaster of the Sundering might be repeated. It was Tyrande Whisperwind who made the decision that would change everything. The priestess of Elune had risen to leadership of her people during Malfurion's long periods of slumber in the Emerald Dream, and she had proven herself a capable and decisive ruler. Now, facing the greatest crisis her people had experienced since the Sundering, Tyrande decided that desperate times called for desperate measures. She went to the Barrow prison where Illidan had been confined for 10,000 years. The Watchers tried to stop her, warning her that releasing the betrayer would bring disaster upon them all. But Tyrande was determined. She remembered the power that Illidan had wielded during the War of the Ancients, the way he had turned the tide at Black Rook Hold. If anyone could help them defeat the Legion again, it was the Night Elf they had imprisoned for doing just that. The reunion between Illidan and Tyrande was not what either of them might have hoped. 10,000 years had changed them both, had added layers of experience and pain that made the innocent love of their youth seem like a distant dream. Illidan looked upon Tyrande with eyes that burned with fell fire, and she looked upon him with a mixture of hope and fear. She told him about the Legion's return, about the danger facing their people, about the need for champions who could stand against the darkness. Illidan listened, and when she finished, he agreed to help. He did not do so out of loyalty to the Night Elves, who had imprisoned him for millennia. He did not do so out of love for Tyrande, though he still loved her in his own twisted way. He did so because the Burning Legion was his enemy, had been his enemy since the War of the Ancients, and he would never pass up an opportunity to strike against them. His hatred for the demons was the one constant in his long life, the fire that had kept him sane during 10,000 years of darkness. Malfurion was furious when he learned what Tyrande had done. The brothers had not spoken in 10 millennia, and their relationship had not improved with time. Malfurion saw only the betrayer, the night elf who had endangered their people with his reckless creation of a new well of eternity. Illidan saw only the brother who had condemned him to eternal imprisonment, who had taken Tyrande while Illidan rotted in darkness. Their alliance against the Legion was one of necessity, not reconciliation. The Legion's forces in Ashenvale were led by Tychondrius, one of the Dreadlords who served as the Legion's intelligence officers and strategists. Tychondrius had been tasked with recovering a powerful artifact called the Skull of Gul'dan, the preserved remains of the orc warlock who had first opened the portal between Azeroth and Draenor. The skull contained immense demonic power, and Tychondrius intended to use it to enhance the Legion's forces. Illidan learned of the skull's existence and its location through means that he never fully explained. Perhaps his fel-touched vision allowed him to perceive artifacts of demonic power, or perhaps he had contacts among the Legion's forces from his time as a spy during the War of the Ancients. Whatever the source of his knowledge, Illidan set out to claim the skull for himself, seeing in it an opportunity to gain power that could turn the tide of the war. The confrontation between Illidan and Tychondrius took place in the heart of Felwood, a forest that had been corrupted by the Legion's FL magic. Illidan fought his way through waves of demons to reach the skull, his arcane power augmented by the fel energies that had been burned into him by Sargeras all those millennia ago. When he finally stood before the Skull of Gul'dan, he did not hesitate. Illidan absorbed the skull's power, drawing its demonic energies into himself. The transformation that resulted was dramatic and horrifying. His body twisted in ways that should have been impossible, that should have killed him outright. Wings sprouted from his back, massive leathery appendages that marked him as something other than mortal. His feet transformed into hooves, his gait changing to accommodate a body that no longer obeyed the rules of normal anatomy. Horns emerged from his skull, curving backward in a configuration that mirrored those of the most powerful demons. His skin took on a deeper hue, marked with tattoos that seemed to glow with fel energy, even when no light touched them. The transformation was not merely physical, but spiritual, a fundamental reshaping of Illidan's very being. He had consumed a portion of Gul'dan's soul, had absorbed memories and experiences that stretched back to the orc warlock's first dealings with the Legion. These memories would haunt Illidan for the rest of his existence, whispers from a dead orc that mixed with his own thoughts, in ways that were sometimes difficult to distinguish. The night elf, who had been born with golden eyes, became something new, something that was neither demon nor mortal, but a hybrid of both. Illidan had become the first demon hunter, a being who used the powers of demons to destroy them. The transformation was irreversible, a one-way journey into a new form of existence. Whatever doubts Illidan might have harbored were now irrelevant. He was committed to this path, body and soul, for as long as he lived. With his new power, Illidan easily defeated Tychondrius. The Dreadlord had underestimated his transformed opponent, had assumed that no mortal could truly channel demonic power without being consumed by it. That assumption cost Tychondrius everything. Illidan's warglaves carved through the Dreadlord's defenses with contemptuous ease, fail fire burning away demonic flesh that had survived countless battles across the cosmos. Tichondrius fell before the betrayer's fell-enhanced might, the first of many demons who would die by Illidan's hand. The satisfaction Illidan felt at Tichondrius's defeat was profound. For the first time since the War of the Ancients, he had personally slain a major demon lord. He had proven that his methods worked, that the power he had claimed was real and effective. The cost of that power was terrible, but Illidan had long since made peace with paying terrible costs. But the victory came at a price beyond the physical transformation. When Malfurion saw what his brother had become, he was horrified beyond words. The transformation that Illidan had undergone was an abomination in Malfurion's eyes, a willing embrace of the very corruption they had fought so hard to defeat. To the druid, who had spent his life learning to work in harmony with nature, Illidan's choice to merge with demonic power was a betrayal of everything they believed in. The brothers confronted each other in the corrupted forest, their argument escalating into something that threatened to become violence. Malfurion accused Illidan of betraying everything they had fought for, of becoming the very thing they were trying to destroy. Illidan countered that he had done what was necessary, that the power he had gained would allow him to defeat the Legion in ways that Malfurion's druidism never could. Neither brother was willing to see the other's perspective, and their relationship, already damaged by 10,000 years of separation, shattered completely. Illidan was banished from Night Elf society for the second time, but unlike his previous imprisonment, this exile was not to a barrow cell. Illidan was cast out into the wider world, free to pursue his own path, but forbidden from returning to his people. He accepted this judgment with something approaching relief. He had never truly fit among the Night Elves anyway, and now, transformed as he was, he fit even less. The Third War continued without Illidan's direct participation in its final battles. The Night Elves, allied with humans and orcs, made their last stand at Mount Hejal, and the World Tree Nordrassil was destroyed in a final act of sacrifice that defeated the Demon Lord Archimond. The Legion was defeated, but Azeroth was changed forever. The Night Elves had lost their immortality, their connection to the Well of Eternity, severed by the destruction of the World Tree. The world had survived, but it would never be the same. Illidan, meanwhile, had his own plans to pursue. His hatred of the Legion burned hotter than ever, and his new power gave him the means to act on that hatred. He would find a way to strike at the demons, to hurt them in ways they had never been hurt before, and nothing, not his brother, not the Night Elves, not the entire world, would stand in his way. In the aftermath of the Third War, Illidan found himself approached by an unexpected messenger. Kil'jaeden, one of the two most powerful Eredar lords who served as Sargeras' chief lieutenants, reached out to the betrayer with a proposition. The Demon Lord had a task that required someone of Illidan's unique talents, and he was prepared to offer significant rewards in exchange for its completion. The task was simple in concept, but staggeringly difficult in execution. The Lich King, the entity that controlled the Scourge, had begun to break free from the Legion's control. Originally created by Kil'jaeden as a tool for softening Azeroth's defenses, the Lich King had grown powerful enough to pursue his own agenda, and that agenda no longer aligned with the Legion's goals. Kil'jaeden wanted the Lich King destroyed before he could become a true rival power. Illidan accepted the bargain, though not out of loyalty to Kil'jaeden or the Legion. He saw in this task an opportunity to gain power and resources, to build a force that could eventually turn against the demons themselves. If he could destroy the Lich King, he would prove his value to kill Jaden, while simultaneously eliminating a threat to Azeroth. And when the time was right, he would use the power he had gained to strike at the Legion itself. To accomplish his task, Illidan needed an army. He gathered followers from among the races of Azeroth, recruiting those who were willing to embrace his methods in exchange for the power to fight demons. The most notable of these recruits were the Blood Elves, high elves who had survived the Scourge's destruction of Quel'Thalas and now hungered desperately for magical energy to replace the Sunwell that had been corrupted. Illidan offered them access to fell magic, and many accepted despite the dangers such power posed. He also recruited Naga, the serpentine descendants of the Highborn who had been transformed by the old gods during the Sundering. Lady Vashj, one of the most powerful Naga sea witches, pledged her forces to Illidan's cause. The Naga had their own reasons for following the betrayer, but their military might added significantly to his growing army. Illidan's plan to destroy the Lich King centered on an artifact called the Eye of Sargeras. This ancient relic, recovered from the tomb of Sargeras in the Broken Isles, contained enough destructive power to tear apart the very fabric of reality. The Eye had been forged by the Dark Titan himself, imbued with a portion of his world-breaking power. It was one of the most dangerous artifacts in existence, capable of unmaking entire continents if properly channeled. The tomb of Sargeras lay on the Broken Isles, the shattered remnant of ancient Suramar that had sunk beneath the waves during the Sundering. The original Gul'dan had died there decades earlier, attempting to claim power that was beyond his ability to control. The Eye remained within the tomb, waiting for someone with the knowledge and the will to wield it. Illidan possessed both. Claiming the Eye was itself an adventure of considerable danger. The tomb was guarded by demons who had been left behind when Gul'dan's expedition failed, creatures who had spent years in the darkness waiting for someone to claim their master's prize. Illidan and his forces fought through these guardians, the demon hunter's power growing with each enemy slain as he absorbed their fell essence. When he finally stood before the Eye, Illidan felt the artifact's power calling to him, resonating with the demonic energies that now flowed through his veins. The ritual to activate the Eye of Sargeras was conducted on the Broken Isles themselves, Illidan drawing upon the ley lines that crisscrossed the ancient Night Elf ruins. The spell required precise manipulation of enormous energies, the kind of working that only the most powerful arcanists could hope to achieve. Illidan had spent millennia studying magic in all its forms, and even his fell, corrupted state did not diminish his understanding of the arcane arts. The ritual nearly succeeded. Channels of destructive energy lanced across the world, visible as lines of green fire that stretched from horizon to horizon. At Icecrown, the very foundations of the glacier began to shake, cracks appearing in ice that had stood unchanged for centuries. The Lich King felt the assault and raged against it, but he could do nothing to stop power that came from half a world away. But the ritual was interrupted by Malfurion and Maya of Shadowsong, who had pursued Illidan across the sea to prevent him from using such dangerous magic. They had tracked him from Kalimdor, following the trail of devastation left by his armies. When they arrived at the Broken Isles, they found Illidan in the midst of his working, vulnerable as his attention was focused entirely on the eye. The battle that followed was three-sided, with Illidan's forces fighting against both his pursuers and the magical backlash of the interrupted ritual. Malfurion's druidic powers disrupted the flows of arcane energy, while Maiev led her wardens in a direct assault on Illidan's position. The demon hunter was forced to abandon his working, to flee before the eye's uncontrolled power could consume him along with everything else on the Broken Isles. His attempt on the Lich King's life was thwarted. Kil'jaeden was not pleased with this failure. The demon lord appeared before Illidan in a display of terrifying power, making clear that failure would not be tolerated. Illidan was given one more chance to fulfill his bargain, one more opportunity to destroy the Lich King. If he failed again, Kil'jaeden would destroy him. Illidan regrouped his forces and made for Northrend, the frozen continent where Icecrown stood. He would assault the glacier directly, using his army to clear a path to the frozen throne where the Lich King's spirit waited. It was a desperate gamble, but Illidan saw no other option. He could not hide from Kil'jaeden forever, and he was not prepared to simply accept death. The journey to Icecrown was a brutal campaign through frozen wastes populated by the Lich King's undead servants. Illidan's forces fought through waves of scourge, sustaining heavy casualties, but pressing ever forward. The Blood Elves proved their worth as soldiers, their hunger for magical energy driving them to feats of desperate courage. The Naga were less reliable in the frozen environment, but they contributed their own brand of serpentine savagery to the advance. At the base of the frozen throne, Illidan encountered an unexpected obstacle. Arthas Menethil, the fallen prince of Lordaeron, who had become the Lich King's champion, stood waiting for him. Arthas had merged with the Lich King's spirit, was in the process of becoming a new entity that combined the human's form with the cosmic entity's power. He would not allow Illidan to interfere with that process. The duel between Illidan and Arthas was a clash of titans. Two of the most powerful beings on Azeroth, both transformed by dark forces beyond mortal comprehension, fought at the foot of the frozen throne while their armies clashed around them. Illidan wielded his warglaives with demonic speed and precision, the twin blades spinning in deadly arcs that would have slain any lesser opponent. Arthas swung Frostmourne, the cursed blade that had stolen his soul, its rune blade edge hungering for the demon hunter's life force. The combat raged across the icy platform, each combatant pushing the other to their limits. Illidan's demonic agility allowed him to dodge strikes that would have killed him instantly, while Arthas's deathly resilience let him absorb wounds that should have been fatal. Fell fire and frost magic clashed in spectacular displays of power, the energies of two opposing forces colliding in a battle that the very elements seemed to pause to witness. For long minutes, the outcome hung in the balance. Illidan scored numerous hits on Arthas, his warglaives carving wounds that leaked, black ichor rather than blood. Arthas retaliated with strikes, empowered by the Lich King's will, each blow carrying the weight of thousands of souls enslaved within Frostmourne. The frozen ground cracked beneath their feet, unable to withstand the forces being unleashed. In the end, Arthas proved the stronger. His blade found an opening in Illidan's defenses, carving a grievous wound across the demon hunter's chest that nearly split him in two. Illidan fell, defeated but not killed, his demonic constitution barely keeping him alive, as Arthas ascended the frozen throne to complete his transformation into the Lich King. The battle for Icecrown was lost. Illidan's followers carried their fallen master away from the frozen battlefield, escaping before the newly empowered Lich King could finish what Arthas had started. They fled through portals to Outland, the shattered remnant of the orcish homeworld Draenor, seeking refuge from both the Lich King and the demon lord Kil'jaeden, who would surely be seeking revenge for Illidan's failure. Outland would become Illidan's new domain, the place where he would rebuild his power and prepare for the wars to come. He had failed to destroy the Lich King, but he was not defeated. He would rise again, stronger than before, and continue his eternal war against the forces of darkness. The betrayer was down, but he was far from finished. Outland was a realm of shattered landscapes and twisted energies, a world that had been torn apart by the reckless magic of the Orcish warlocks decades earlier. What had once been Draenor, the homeworld of the orcs and a refuge for the Draenei, was now a fragment of a world, floating in the chaotic void of the twisting nether. Yet even in this devastation, life persisted, and power could be found by those willing to seize it. The ruler of Outland at the time of Illidan's arrival was Magtheridon, a pit lord who had claimed the shattered world as his own domain. Magtheridon had been left behind when the main legion forces departed Draenor, and he had spent the intervening years building his own army of fell orcs, orcs who had been corrupted by drinking demon blood and now served as fanatical soldiers. From his stronghold in the Black Temple, formerly known as the Temple of Karabor, Magtheridon ruled Outland with an iron fist. Illidan saw in Magtheridon both an obstacle and an opportunity. The Pit Lord controlled resources and forces that could be useful, and the Black Temple itself was a fortress of tremendous strategic value. But more importantly, defeating Magtheridon would send a message to the Legion. It would prove that Illidan was still a force to be reckoned with, that his defeat at Icecrown had not broken him, and it might buy him time to prepare his defenses before Kil'jaeden came seeking revenge. The campaign against Magtheridon was swift and brutal. Illidan's forces, augmented by local allies who had suffered under the Pit Lord's rule, struck at the fell orc strongholds with devastating efficiency. The Blood Elves proved particularly effective in these battles, their hunger for magical energy allowing them to drain the fell power from their enemies and turn it against them. The Naga, more comfortable in Outland's chaotic environment than they had been in Northrend's frozen wastes, contributed their own devastating magical abilities. The final battle took place within the Black Temple itself. Illidan fought his way through Magtheridon's elite guards to reach the Pit Lord's inner sanctum, where the two titans clashed in a battle that shook the foundations of the ancient Draenei temple. Magtheridon was powerful, one of the most formidable demons outside the Legion's inner circle, but Illidan had grown in power since his transformation, and his hatred of demons lent him strength beyond what mere physical attributes could provide. Magtheridon fell, not killed, but defeated and imprisoned. Illidan had the Pit Lord chained beneath the Black Temple, periodically drained of his fell blood, to create new fell orcs loyal to Illidan rather than to the Legion. It was a fitting fate for the creature who had terrorized Outland for so long, and it demonstrated the ruthless pragmatism that characterized Illidan's approach to warfare. With Magtheridon defeated, Illidan declared himself Lord of Outland. The Black Temple became his seat of power, its ancient halls repurposed for his needs. He began the work of transforming Outland into a fortress that could resist any attack, whether from the Legion, the forces of Azeroth, or any other threat that might emerge. Central to Illidan's plans was the creation of the Illidari, an organization of demon hunters trained in the techniques that Illidan himself had pioneered. These warriors underwent the same transformation that Illidan had experienced, absorbing demonic energies into themselves and learning to use the powers of demons against them. The process was dangerous, killing many who attempted it, but those who survived emerged as some of the most effective demon slayers in existence. The philosophy behind the Illidari was simple but controversial. Fight fire with fire. Traditional methods of combating demons relied on holy magic, on the light's power to purify and destroy fell corruption. These methods were effective, but limited, requiring years of training to master and drawing upon power sources that the Legion had long studied and learned to counter. Illidan proposed a different approach. By absorbing demonic energy directly, by making themselves vessels for the very power they sought to destroy, demon hunters could access abilities that no priest or paladin ever could. The sacrifice required was immense. Every demon hunter gave up their normal vision, their eyes burned away by fell fire and replaced with spectral sight that perceived the world in terms of magical energy. They sacrificed their connection to the light, the comforting presence that many had known since childhood. They sacrificed their very identity in some ways, merging their souls with demonic essences that would never fully leave them. In exchange, they gained power that could match the Legion's greatest warriors. The Illidari were recruited from among the Night Elves and Blood Elves who were willing to sacrifice everything in the war against the Legion. Many came from backgrounds of tragedy, survivors of demon attacks who sought vengeance above all else. Others were idealists who believed that any price was worth paying to protect the innocent. Still others were simply warriors seeking power, drawn by the promise of abilities that transcended mortal limits. Illidan accepted them all, recognizing that motivation mattered less than results. They were taught to embrace their inner demon, to master the fell energies that threatened to consume them, to become living weapons against the forces of darkness. Each demon hunter bore the fell fire eyes that marked their transformation, their original eyes burned away and replaced with new organs that could perceive demonic magic. They learned to channel fell energy into devastating attacks, to metamorphose into demonic forms of terrible power, to use their spectral sight to track demons across vast distances. Training as an Illidari was not for the faint of heart. Initiates were required to consume the essence of a demon, binding its spirit to their own in a process that could easily result in possession or death. The ritual was performed in the depths of the Black Temple, in chambers specifically designed to contain the energies unleashed when mortal and demon merged. Many initiates died screaming as the demon essence overwhelmed them, their bodies twisted into monstrous forms before being put down by their instructors. Those who successfully completed this binding gained access to the demon's power and memories, but they also gained a constant companion in their mind, an entity that whispered temptations and threatened to take control at any moment of weakness. Illidan oversaw this training personally when his other duties permitted. He knew better than anyone the dangers of demonic power, the constant struggle to maintain control over forces that wanted nothing more than to consume their wielder. He pushed his students hard, weeding out those who lacked the will to resist their inner demons, preserving only those strong enough to serve as true demon hunters. The Black Temple itself was transformed during this period. What had once been a holy place, dedicated to the Draenei's worship of the light, became a fortress dedicated to the war against the Legion. Illidan's lieutenants established themselves in various chambers, each overseeing different aspects of the war effort. Lady Vashj commanded the Naga forces from the Serpent Shrine Cavern. Kael'thas Sunstrider, Prince of the Blood Elves, led his people from the Eye in Tempest Keep until his own ambitions led him down a darker path. Illidan also established alliances with the Ashtung-broken Draenei, who had been corrupted during the Legion's invasion of Draenor, and now sought vengeance against those who had destroyed their people. Led by the elder sage Akama, the Ashtung provided valuable intelligence about Outland and its many dangers. But this alliance was built on a foundation of mutual distrust, as Akama chafed under Illidan's authoritarian rule and harbored his own plans for the future. The Lord of Outland spent years building his power base, preparing for the inevitable confrontation with the Legion. He knew that Kill Jaden would eventually come for him, seeking revenge for his failure at Icecrown. When that day came, Illidan intended to be ready. He would not run again. He would face the Demon Lord with an army at his back and the full power of Outland at his command. But Illidan's preparations were not solely defensive. He was also planning offensive operations against the Legion, strikes at demon worlds that would weaken the enemy before the final confrontation. The most ambitious of these plans involved an assault on Nathreza, the homeworld of the Nathrezim Dreadlords, who served as the Legion's intelligence officers and strategists. The raid on Nathreza was a masterpiece of unconventional warfare. Illidan led a force of his most elite demon hunters through a portal to the Dreadlord homeworld, striking without warning at the heart of Legion intelligence operations. The Nathrezim, for all their cunning, were unprepared for an attack on their own territory. They had grown complacent in their assumption that no mortal force would dare assault a world so deep in Legion-controlled space. That assumption proved fatal. Illidan's forces tore through Nathreza's defenses with brutal efficiency. The demon hunters were perfectly suited for this kind of operation, their ability to consume demonic energy, allowing them to grow stronger with each enemy they slew. The Dreadlord's own minions became fuel for their destruction, every fallen demon adding to the power of the Illidari assault. Illidan himself cut a swath through the Nathrezim's leadership, his warglaves drinking deep of Dreadlord essence. The archives of Nathreza contained millennia of intelligence gathered by the Legion's spy masters, records of infiltrations on countless worlds, dossiers on potential targets for corruption, strategic assessments of every civilization the Legion had encountered. Illidan ordered all of it destroyed, denying the Legion access to knowledge that had taken ages to accumulate. Libraries burned, data crystals shattered, memory pools were drained and corrupted. But the true stroke of genius came at the end of the assault. As Illidan withdrew his forces, he arranged for the portal to Nethreza to be destabilized in a very specific way. The dimensional energies that connected Nethreza to the wider cosmos were turned inward, creating a cascade reaction that fed upon the planet's own magical infrastructure. The resulting explosion tore the world apart, destroying it as Draenor had been destroyed years earlier. The Nethrezim lost not only their homeworld, but countless records of Legion operations across the cosmos. Surviving dreadlords scattered across the universe would find themselves cut off from their central command structure, forced to operate independently without the coordinated intelligence network that had made them so effective. It was a blow from which the dreadlords would never fully recover. This victory demonstrated what Illidan had always believed, that the Legion could be defeated, could be hurt in ways that mattered. The demons were powerful, but they were not invincible. With the right tactics, the right level of ruthlessness, they could be brought down. The raid on Nethreza proved that Illidan's methods, however extreme, produced results that conventional warfare could never achieve. The forces of Azeroth came to Outland in pursuit of their own agendas, and their arrival would ultimately seal Illidan's fate. The Alliance and Horde had discovered the reopened Dark Portal, the gateway between Azeroth and Outland that had been sealed decades earlier. On the other side, they found a shattered world dominated by the Betrayer and his forces, and they decided that Illidan Stormrage was a threat that needed to be eliminated. The reasoning behind this decision was complex. Illidan had allied himself with Kil'jaeden during the Third War, however briefly, and his methods were extreme enough to alarm even those who shared his hatred of the Legion. The Blood Elves under his command were drawing upon fell magic in ways that threatened their very souls. The fell orcs that he had created were little better than the demons they had been designed to fight, and Illidan himself had become a creature of darkness, a demon hunter who had perhaps lost himself to the demons he hunted. The Shatar, a faction of Naru who had established themselves in Outland, were particularly concerned about Illidan's activities. These beings of pure light saw in the Betrayer a corruption that threatened to spread across the shattered world. They allied with the forces of Azeroth, providing intelligence and support for the campaign to bring Illidan down. The war for Outland raged across multiple fronts. Alliance and Horde forces established footholds throughout the shattered world, pushing back against Illidan's armies on all sides. The demon hunters fought fiercely, their enhanced abilities making them deadly opponents, but they were outnumbered by the combined might of two worlds. One by one, Illidan's strongholds fell. The first major confrontation came at Hellfire Citadel, where the fell orcs had established their primary breeding grounds. Alliance and Horde forces, temporarily setting aside their mutual hostility in the face of a common enemy, stormed the Citadel's gates and fought their way through its blood-soaked corridors. The fell orcs fought with savage desperation, knowing that defeat meant the end of their kind, but they could not stand against the combined might of Azeroth's greatest warriors. Serpent Shrine Cavern fell next, Lady Vashj making her last stand against the invaders who had come to claim her domain. The Naga Sea Witch had served Illidan faithfully since the days of the War of the Ancients, when she had been a highborn priestess in Queen Ashara's court. Now she died in the depths of a shattered world, far from the seas she had once commanded. Her death was a significant blow to Illidan's forces, removing one of his most capable lieutenants from the field. Tempest Keep, the dimensional fortress that had once belonged to the Naru, fell to a separate assault. Kael'thas Sunstrider, the prince of the Blood Elves who had led his people to Outland in search of magical sustenance, had established himself there with his most loyal followers. But Kael'thas had grown increasingly erratic, his addiction to magical energy driving him to actions that even Illidan found troubling. When the forces of Azeroth came for Tempest Keep, they found a Blood Elf prince who had spiraled into madness, a leader whose desperate hunger had consumed his reason. Akama's betrayal came as less of a surprise than it perhaps should have. The Elder Sage had never been comfortable with Illidan's methods, had never truly accepted the betrayer as a legitimate ruler. He had watched Illidan's forces oppress his people, had seen the Ashtong treated as servants rather than allies. The promise of freedom that Illidan had offered proved to be just another form of bondage, and Akama's resentment had festered over the years. When the forces of Azeroth offered him an opportunity to free his people from Illidan's dominion, Akama took it without hesitation. He provided information about the Black Temple's defenses, about the weaknesses in Illidan's security, about the best ways to penetrate the fortress that the betrayer had spent years fortifying. Maiev Shadowsong also returned to play her role in Illidan's downfall. The former warden had been hunting the betrayer since his escape from her custody during the Third War, pursuing him across continents and through dimensional portals. Her obsession with capturing Illidan had consumed her entire existence, had become the defining purpose of her life. She had lost wardens to this hunt, had sacrificed her own sanity in pursuit of her quarry. Now, finally, she had tracked him to his last refuge, and she would not be denied her revenge. She allied with Akama and the forces of Azeroth, lending her expertise and her personal vendetta to the assault on the Black Temple. The Battle of the Black Temple was the climactic confrontation of the Outland campaign. Champions of the Alliance and Horde, supported by Akama's Ashtong and Maiev's wardens, fought their way through the temple's defenses. The ancient Draenei structure had been transformed by Illidan's occupation, its holy chambers now corrupted by fell energy, its sacred halls filled with demons and twisted creatures. The invaders faced Illidan's lieutenants one by one, each battle more desperate than the last. High Warlord Nagentus fell in the first chambers, his Naga warriors overwhelmed by the sheer numbers of the assault force. Supremus, a massive abyssal construct of living flame, was destroyed in the temple's outer courts. The Shade of Akama, a spiritual fragment of the Elder Sage that Illidan had bound to ensure his servants' loyalty, was confronted and freed by Akama himself. The Reliquary of Souls, a terrible artifact that contained the essences of countless tortured beings, was silenced forever. The Illidari Council fell defending the approaches to Illidan's sanctum. Mother Shiraz, a Shivara priestess who had been one of Illidan's most trusted advisors, gave her life defending the inner chambers. Finally, the attackers reached Illidan's sanctum at the pinnacle of the Black Temple. The betrayer awaited them, his warglaves drawn, his fell fire eyes blazing with defiance. He had known this moment would come, had spent years preparing for it, but he had hoped for more time, more resources, more soldiers to throw against the Legion's inevitable counterattack. Instead, his empire was crumbling around him, and the enemies before him were not demons, but the very mortals he had sacrificed so much to protect. The battle was fierce, but ultimately one-sided. Illidan was powerful, perhaps the most powerful individual combatant on Outland, but he could not stand alone against an army. The champions of Azeroth wore him down with wave after wave of attacks, their combined might eventually overwhelming his defenses. Maev's Shadowsong struck the final blow. Her Umbra Crescent found its mark, carving through Illidan's defenses and delivering a wound that even his demonic regeneration could not heal. The betrayer fell. His 10,000-year game of survival finally ended. As Illidan lay dying, his last words were a warning and a prophecy. He told his killers that they were fools, that they did not understand what they were dealing with. The Legion was still out there, still planning its return to Azeroth, and without Illidan to oppose them, there would be no one with the knowledge and power to stop them. "You are not prepared," he gasped with his final breath, a condemnation of those who had brought him down and a prediction of the darkness to come. Maiev claimed Illidan's body, refusing to allow it to be destroyed or left to rot in the ruins of the Black Temple. She transported it back to Azeroth, to the vault of the Wardens on the Broken Isles, where it was placed in a crystal prison and guarded against any possibility of resurrection. The betrayer was dead, but Maiev was not willing to take any chances. She had seen Illidan cheat death too many times to assume that his story was truly over. The Vault of the Wardens also became the prison for the surviving Illidari. The demon hunters who had served Illidan were captured and imprisoned alongside their master's body, their powers deemed too dangerous to be allowed to roam free. They would remain in their cells for years, waiting for a chance to continue the war that Illidan had begun. The forces of Azeroth celebrated their victory over the betrayer. Outland was pacified, the threat of Illidan's forces eliminated. But some who had participated in the campaign wondered if they had made a terrible mistake. Illidan's warning echoed in their minds, his prediction that they were not prepared for what was to come. They hoped that he had been wrong. They feared that he had been right. Years passed after Illidan's death, and the world moved on. The Lich King rose to the height of his power, launching an assault on the living that threatened to consume all of Azeroth. Champions from both Alliance and Horde journeyed to Northrend to face him, fighting through the frozen wastes to reach the very ice-crowned citadel where Illidan had once failed. In the end, the Lich King fell, his threat ended by the same mortal champions who had brought down the betrayer. Deathwing, the corrupted dragon aspect, who had long been driven mad by the whispers of the old gods, emerged from hiding and shattered the world itself. His cataclysm reshaped continents, opened ancient wounds in the earth, and awakened threats that had slumbered for millennia. Once again, the heroes of Azeroth rose to meet the challenge, eventually striking down the mad dragon in a battle that taxed the very limits of what mortal beings could achieve. The mist parted from Pandaria, revealing an ancient land that had been hidden from the rest of the world for 10,000 years. An ancient evil stirred there, feeding on the negative emotions of those who ventured into its domain. The Alliance and Horde fought each other across Pandaria's beautiful landscapes before finally uniting to face the threat that endangered them all. And then came the Iron Horde, an alternate version of the Orcish Horde that poured through a portal from another timeline. This threat was defeated, but the architect of the invasion escaped, an orc warlock named Gul'dan, who had made dark bargains with the Burning Legion. Through all of these crises, through all of these world-ending threats, Illidan's body lay in its crystal prison, watched over by Maiev and her wardens, preserved against a future that no one could predict. The vault of the wardens on the Broken Isles remained secure, its prisoner unchanging while the world transformed around him. Maiev never wavered in her vigil, convinced that Illidan's story was not truly over, that the betrayer would somehow find a way to return. That future arrived with the return of Gul'dan, not the original Gul'dan, who had died decades earlier at the tomb of Sargeras, but the alternate version from the timeline of the Iron Horde. This Gul'dan served the Burning Legion with fanatical devotion, seeking to succeed where his alternate self had failed. He would open the way for the Legion's greatest invasion yet, and he would use Illidan's body as a tool in that dark endeavor. Gul'dan's mission brought him to the Vault of the Wardens, where he sought to claim Illidan's body for his demonic masters. The warlock fought his way through the vault's defenses, slaughtering wardens and releasing imprisoned demon hunters in the chaos. When he reached Illidan's crystal prison, he performed a ritual that was meant to corrupt the betrayer's soul and turn him into a weapon for the Legion. The ritual did not go as planned. Illidan's spirit, which had been wandering in a realm between life and death since his physical body's destruction, proved resistant to Gul'dan's corruption. The encounter between the two was not the simple subjugation that the warlock had expected, but a battle of wills that Illidan ultimately won. His soul escaped Gul'dan's grasp, leaving the warlock with only an empty body to present to his masters. Meanwhile, the demon hunters who had been imprisoned in the vault seized their opportunity. The chaos caused by Gul'dan's assault allowed them to break free of their cells, and they immediately set about continuing the mission that Illidan had given them before the Black Temple's fall. They would fight the Legion, no matter the cost, no matter who stood in their way. The Legion's assault on Azeroth began shortly after Gul'dan's failure at the Vault. Demons poured through portals across the world, launching the most devastating invasion since the War of the Ancients. The Burning Legion had tired of subtle manipulation and indirect assault. This time, they would crush Azeroth with overwhelming force, leaving nothing behind but a dead world. The Naru Zera, one of the most powerful beings of pure light in existence, had foreseen this moment and had prepared for it. She had identified Illidan as the child of light and shadow, a prophesied champion who would play a crucial role in defeating the Legion. Her agents had been working for years to gather the components necessary to restore Illidan to life, including fragments of his soul that had been scattered across the cosmos. The resurrection of Illidan Stormrage was a process that took time and considerable effort. His soul had to be retrieved from the realm where it had wandered since his death. His body had to be restored from the crystal prison where it had been preserved, and the two had to be reunited in a way that allowed Illidan to return as himself, not as a puppet of the light or a vessel for demonic corruption. When Illidan finally awakened, he found a world transformed. The Legion had established beachheads across Azeroth, their forces threatening to overwhelm the defenders. Demons poured through portals on the broken shore, the same broken isles where Illidan had once attempted to destroy the Lich King with the Eye of Sargeras. The tomb of Sargeras, long sealed, had been reopened by Gul'dan and now served as the primary gateway for the Legion's invasion. The demon hunters he had trained were fighting desperately to hold back the demonic tide, but they needed leadership, needed the vision and power that only Illidan could provide. They had kept faith with their master even during the years of his death, believing that somehow, someday, he would return to lead them once more. Now that faith was rewarded, and they rallied to his banner with fervent devotion. More surprisingly, Illidan found himself allied with many who had once been his enemies. Malfurion, who had condemned him to imprisonment, now fought alongside the demon hunters, recognizing that the threat they faced transcended old grudges. The brothers met on the battlefield of the Broken Shore, their first conversation in years passing in silence, as they acknowledged with a nod that the time for conflict between them had passed. They would never be friends, perhaps never truly understand each other, but they could be allies against a common foe. Tyrande, who had freed him from his first imprisonment only to see him banished again, accepted his return as a necessary evil. She still loved Malfurion, would always love Malfurion, but she could acknowledge Illidan's value to their cause. The priestess of Elune watched the betrayer return to war with complex emotions, remembering the young night elf who had loved her so desperately, wondering if that love still burned within the creature he had become. Even Maiev Shadowsong, his jailer and would-be executioner, grudgingly acknowledged that Illidan's power was needed against the Legion. The warden, who had spent millennia hunting him, now stood by his side in battle, her hatred for him temporarily set aside in favor of the greater threat. She never stopped watching him, never stopped waiting for him to betray them again, but she fought alongside him nonetheless. Illidan wasted no time in resuming his war. He rallied the demon hunters under his command, directing them to strike at Legion positions across Azeroth. He provided crucial intelligence about Legion tactics and vulnerabilities, knowledge gained from millennia of studying his enemy. He identified weaknesses in the demons' supply lines, predicted their strategic movements, and developed countermeasures against their most devastating abilities. The betrayer proved himself invaluable as a strategist as well as a warrior. His understanding of the Legion's organizational structure allowed Azeroth's defenders to target key commanders whose deaths would cause maximum disruption. His knowledge of demonic magic helped the Order of the Silver Hand develop more effective countermeasures against fel corruption. His network of contacts among various shadowy organizations provided intelligence that no one else could access. And, through it all, Illidan began planning an assault that would take the fight to the Legion's own territory, an invasion of Argus itself. He had always believed that the only way to truly defeat the Legion was to strike at their heart, to bring war to the worlds they had held for millennia. Now, finally, he had the resources and the allies to make that dream a reality. But first, there was unfinished business to attend to. Gul'dan had escaped the vault of the Wardens and had made his way to the Nighthold in Suramar, where he was attempting to use the Nightwell's power to open a portal for Sargeras himself. If the Dark Titan succeeded in entering Azeroth, all would be lost. Illidan joined the assault on the Nighthold, determined to stop Gul'dan once and for all. The confrontation between Illidan and Gul'dan was the culmination of events set in motion by the Warlock's attack on the Vault. Gul'dan had tried to claim Illidan's body and had failed. Now Illidan would repay that failure with the Warlock's death. The battle at the Nighthold was fierce, with champions of Azeroth fighting through waves of Legion defenders to reach Gul'dan's position at the Nightwell. When they finally confronted the Warlock, they found him channeling enormous amounts of power, trying to complete the portal that would bring Sargeras to Azeroth. The fight that followed pushed everyone involved to their limits. In the end, Gul'dan fell, his broken body unable to sustain the powers he had been trying to channel, but his death came too late to prevent the portal from partially opening. Sargeras' avatar began to emerge, a massive sword that pierced the sky and threatened to destroy everything below. Illidan acted without hesitation. He had spent his entire life preparing for this moment, preparing to strike at the Dark Titan who had burned away his eyes and promised him power in exchange for betrayal. He channeled his demonic energy into a beam of fell fire that struck at the portal, disrupting its formation and forcing Sargeras to withdraw. The immediate threat was ended, but Illidan knew that this was only a temporary reprieve. The war would continue, and it would have to be taken to Argus itself. The assault on Argus was the most ambitious military operation in Azeroth's history. An entire world, the homeworld of the Eredar and the seat of the Burning Legion's power, would be invaded by a force drawn from both the Horde and the Alliance. The logistics alone were staggering, requiring the construction of a dimensional ship capable of traversing the twisting nether while protecting its passengers from the chaotic energies that would destroy unshielded vessels. The Vindikar, a massive Draenei vessel designed for exactly this kind of interdimensional travel, served as the invasion force's primary transport. Prophet Velen, who had fled Argus 25,000 years earlier when his brothers Kil'jaeden and Archimonde had pledged themselves to Sargeras, would finally return to his homeworld. For him, this assault was deeply personal, a chance to confront the betrayal that had defined his existence and perhaps find some measure of closure. Illidan played a crucial role in making this assault possible. He possessed the Sargerite Keystone, an artifact capable of opening portals across cosmic distances. The Keystone had been recovered during his years of fighting the Legion, one of many trophies claimed from fallen demon commanders. Using this artifact, combined with the power of the Pillars of Creation that had been recovered during the War for Azeroth, he could create a stable gateway between the two worlds. The portal would allow an invasion force to reach Argus and bring the war to the Legion's doorstep. For Illidan, the assault on Argus represented the culmination of everything he had worked toward since the War of the Ancients. He had spent 15,000 years fighting the Burning Legion, had sacrificed his eyes, his freedom, his humanity, and his life in service of this goal. Now, finally, he would have the chance to strike at the heart of the Legion itself, to face Sargeras in whatever form the Dark Titan might take. The opening of the portal was a moment of profound significance. For the first time in history, The forces of Azeroth would be taking the fight directly to the Burning Legion's home territory. They would be facing the enemy on ground that had been held by demons for thousands of years, ground that had been corrupted and fortified beyond anything they had ever encountered. Upon arriving on Argus, Illidan and the champions of Azeroth linked up with the Army of the Light, a force of paladins and priests who had been waging their own guerrilla war against the Legion for generations. Led by High Exarchs Tyrande and Lady Ilaria Windrunner, both veterans of the Second War who had been stranded on Argus when the Dark Portal closed, the Army of the Light had been fighting a desperate holding action while waiting for reinforcements from Azeroth. The Naru Zera led the Army of the Light's spiritual forces, and she had particular interest in Illidan. She believed that he was the prophesied child of light and shadow, destined to receive the light's blessing and become the ultimate champion against the darkness. She offered to cleanse Illidan of his demonic corruption, to remake him as a being of pure light who would stand at the head of the armies of righteousness. Illidan refused. In a confrontation that shocked everyone who witnessed it, he rejected Zera's blessing and destroyed the Prime Naru when she tried to force the transformation upon him. "I am my scars," Illidan declared, making clear that he would not surrender the choices that had defined his life. His demonic power, his fell-touched vision, his willingness to use any means necessary against the Legion. These were not flaws to be corrected, but essential parts of who he was. The destruction of Zera caused significant tension within the Allied forces, but there was no time for a full reckoning. The war on Argus demanded immediate attention, and Illidan's power was too valuable to discard over philosophical disagreements. The assault continued, with demon hunters fighting alongside paladins who privately wondered if they had made a terrible mistake in allying with the betrayer. The campaign across Argus was a grueling advance through demon-held territory. The Legion had fortified their homeworld over millennia, creating defenses that made even the Black Temple seem vulnerable by comparison. Every mile of advance cost lives, and the demons seemed to have infinite reinforcements, while the forces of Azeroth grew steadily weaker. Argus itself was a world transformed by the Legion's presence. Once, it had been beautiful, the birthplace of the Eridar race that had produced some of the most brilliant minds in the cosmos. Now it was a nightmarish hellscape, its surface covered with fell corruption, its skies burning with the green fire of demonic energy. The souls of countless beings who had died in the Legion's wars were drawn here, processed through the Burning Throne's machinery to fuel the demon's endless resurrection. The Allied forces established footholds in 3 regions of Argus: Crocune, where the Army of the Light had maintained their resistance for centuries; Magari, the ancient Eridar capital that now lay in ruins; and Antoran Wastes, the industrial heart of the Legion's war machine. Each region presented its own challenges, its own horrors, its own revelations about the true nature of the enemy they faced. Illidan fought at the front lines throughout this campaign, his warglaves carving through demon after demon. He had waited for this moment for 15,000 years, had sacrificed everything for the chance to strike at the Legion in their own territory. Now that the moment had arrived, he would not be denied. His demon hunters followed him into the worst of the fighting, their fell fire eyes blazing with the same determination that had driven their master across the ages. But Illidan's strategy was not focused on conquering territory. He understood that the only way to truly defeat the Legion was to imprison Sargeras, and imprisoning a Titan was effectively impossible through conventional means. The Dark Titan was too powerful, too vast in scope, to be defeated through simple combat. What could be done, however, was binding him. If Sargeras could be trapped in a way that prevented him from acting, the Legion would be effectively decapitated, their leader unable to direct operations across the cosmos. The key to this plan lay in the seat of the Pantheon, an ancient structure where the spirits of the Titans who had shaped the cosmos gathered. These beings, though they had been killed by Sargeras eons ago, still existed as spiritual entities capable of wielding tremendous power. The souls of Amanthul, Eonar, Norganon, Golganath, Khazgoroth, and Agramar waited at the seat, preserved against the day when they might be needed. If they could be convinced to act together, they might have the strength to bind Sargeras and end his threat forever. The assault on Antorus, the Burning Throne, was the final battle of the Argus campaign. The fortress was the heart of the Legion's power, the place where demons were reborn after death, the seat from which Sargeras directed his endless crusade. Breaching its defenses would require everything the forces of Azeroth had to give, and even then, victory was far from assured. Champions of Azeroth fought their way through the fortress's defenses, facing the most powerful demons in existence. The first challenge was the Gorothi Worldbreaker, a massive war machine designed to crack open planetary defenses. The invasion force destroyed it at great cost, opening the way to the fortress's inner chambers. The fellhounds of Sargeras, Faharg, and Shatug guarded the next passage. These beasts had been bred specifically to hunt beings of power, and they sensed the strength of the champions who faced them. The battle was brutal, but the forces of Azeroth prevailed, pressing deeper into the Burning Throne. The Antoran High Command controlled the Legion's military operations across countless worlds. 3 generals, each a master of a different aspect of warfare, had to be defeated simultaneously to prevent any of them from calling for reinforcements. The coordination required tested the limits of the invasion force, but they succeeded, silencing the Legion's command structure. Imonar the Soul Hunter had been tasked with tracking and eliminating threats to the Legion across the cosmos. He saw in the Azerothian champions worthy prey, a challenge that would test his skills. He died learning that he had underestimated his quarry, his soul bound to the Burning Throne's resurrection machinery. Kingaroth, the master architect of the Legion's war machines, fell next. His workshop contained the blueprints for weapons that could devastate entire worlds, knowledge that the invasion force ensured would never be used. They confronted Agramar, a Titan who had been corrupted by Sargeras and now served as his champion. This was perhaps the most heartbreaking battle of the entire campaign. Agramar had once stood among the noble defenders of the cosmos, a being of almost inconceivable power who had devoted himself to protecting the ordered universe. Now he fought against those who sought to save it, his will enslaved to Sargeras' purpose. The Pantheon's spirits reached out to their fallen brother, helping to break Sargeras' hold on his mind. They faced the Coven of Shivara, elite Eridar witches who commanded devastating magic drawn from multiple sources. Each witch specialized in a different form of destruction, and together they were nearly unstoppable. Nearly, but not quite. The forces of Azeroth broke their power and ended their threat. And finally, they reached Argus the Unmaker, the world soul of Argus itself, who had been tortured and corrupted by the Legion into a weapon of mass destruction. Argus had been a nascent titan, a being that should have grown to join the Pantheon in defending the cosmos. Instead, the Legion had twisted his emerging consciousness into something terrible, a font of dark energy that fueled the demon's ability to resurrect. The battle against Argus the Unmaker was fought on multiple levels of reality simultaneously. The champions of Azeroth battled the corrupted world soul in physical combat, while the spirits of the Pantheon worked to bind Sargeras at the seat of the Pantheon. The fighting was desperate, the outcome uncertain until the very end. Champions fell and were restored by their healers, only to fall again and rise once more. The battle seemed endless, a struggle against entropy itself. When Argus finally fell, the power released was channeled into the binding ritual, providing the final component needed to imprison the Dark Titan. The world soul's energy, so long used to resurrect demons, was turned to a new purpose, forging chains that even Sargeras could not break. Sargeras raged against his imprisonment, his fury manifesting as a final, devastating strike against Azeroth. His sword, larger than continents, plunged into the world, piercing the very heart of Silithus and wounding it in ways that would take years to heal. The blood of Azeroth itself, a substance that would come to be called Azerite, began to seep from this wound. But the Dark Titan himself was bound, held by the combined power of the Pantheon in a prison from which there was no escape. And standing at the center of that prison, serving as the lock that held the door closed, was Illidan Stormrage. The betrayer had volunteered for this duty without prompting, without negotiation, without any of the calculations that had characterized so many of his previous decisions. He simply stepped forward and took his place, recognizing that someone would need to guard Sargeras for all eternity, and knowing that no one was better suited to this task than he. His hatred for the Dark Titan, the being who had burned away his eyes and set him on the path that led to this moment, would be the force that kept the prison sealed. That hatred had sustained Illidan through 10,000 years of imprisonment, through transformation into a demon, through death and resurrection. It would sustain him for all eternity now, an unquenchable fire that would never allow Sargeras to escape. As the portal to Azeroth closed behind the retreating champions, Illidan looked upon his ancient enemy. For the first time in his impossibly long life, he had found a purpose that matched the promise of his golden eyes. He would be the eternal warden, the guardian who kept darkness at bay. The betrayer had become the world's final defender. The legacy of Illidan Stormrage ripples through history in ways both obvious and subtle. The demon hunters he trained continue to walk Azeroth, their fell fire eyes marking them as inheritors of his mission. The techniques he developed for fighting demons have been adopted and refined by warriors across the world. The very fact that Azeroth survived the Burning Legion's final assault is due in no small part to his efforts. In the years that followed the Legion's defeat, scholars and historians have struggled to assess Illidan's place in history. He does not fit neatly into any category. He was not a conventional hero. his methods too extreme, and his willingness to work with dark forces too troubling for that label. But neither was he a villain, his ultimate sacrifice and lifelong opposition to the Legion making that label equally inappropriate. Perhaps he was something new, a category unto himself, a being who existed outside the normal boundaries of good and evil. The monuments and memorials dedicated to Illidan are as complex as the being himself. In some places, he is honored as a savior, his image carved in stone alongside the greatest heroes of Azeroth. In others, his memory is condemned, his name spoken as a warning about the dangers of unchecked ambition. The contradiction would likely amuse Illidan if he were aware of it. He never sought the approval of others, never cared much for how history would remember him. He simply did what he believed was necessary. Yet Illidan remains a controversial figure, even in death. Some remember him as a hero, the champion who sacrificed everything to protect a world that had repeatedly rejected him. They point to his defeat of Tichondrius, his destruction of Nethreza, his imprisonment of Sargeras, as evidence of a noble soul hidden beneath layers of darkness. To these admirers, Illidan was always working toward the salvation of Azeroth, however questionable his methods might have seemed. Others remember him as a villain, a power-hungry traitor who caused as much harm as good during his long life. They point to his creation of the Second Well of Eternity, which risked attracting another Legion invasion. They note his alliance with Kill Jaden, however temporary. They recall the Blood Elves who were corrupted under his command, the fell orcs who were created to serve his armies, the countless lives lost in his pursuit of power. These critics argue that Illidan's methods were no different from the demons he claimed to oppose, that he became the very evil he sought to destroy. The Night Elves themselves remain deeply divided on the question of Illidan's legacy. Some of the older generation, those who remember the War of the Ancients and the Sundering, can never forgive him for creating the new Well of Eternity, for risking another invasion by the Legion. They remember the terror of that first war, the millions who died when the world was broken, and they cannot forget that Illidan's actions might have brought all of that horror back upon them. But younger night elves, those born after the long vigil began, tend to view Illidan more sympathetically. They see in him a figure who was willing to make impossible choices, who carried burdens that no one else could bear. They admire his dedication to fighting the Legion, even if they do not approve of all his methods. And they cannot help but respect his final sacrifice, his willingness to spend eternity guarding the greatest threat the universe has ever known. The truth, as is often the case, lies somewhere between these extremes. Illidan Stormrage was a complex being, capable of tremendous good and terrible evil, often simultaneously. He loved his people even as he endangered them. He fought the Legion even as he used their power. He sought to save the world even as he was willing to destroy parts of it. He was a contradiction in every sense, a being who defied easy categorization, who refused to fit into the neat boxes that others tried to place him in. Perhaps the most accurate assessment of Illidan comes from understanding the burden he carried. He was born with golden eyes, a sign of destiny that promised greatness, without specifying what form that greatness would take. From childhood, he was expected to achieve remarkable things, to live up to a prophecy that he had never asked for. This pressure drove him to extremes that might otherwise have been unthinkable, pushing him to take risks and make sacrifices that more cautious souls would have avoided. His love for Tyrande was another defining factor. Illidan never stopped loving her, not through 10,000 years of imprisonment, not through transformation into a demon, not through death and resurrection. This love was a source of both strength and weakness, driving him to prove himself worthy of her, even as it blinded him to the reality that she had made her choice long ago. Whether this love was noble or obsessive depends on the observer's perspective. Malfurion's relationship with his brother is equally complex. The druid who became the greatest of his kind and the demon hunter who walked the darkest paths were always defined in relation to each other. Every choice one made seemed to push the other in the opposite direction. Malfurion's embrace of nature led Illidan to embrace arcane magic. Illidan's willingness to use any means necessary led Malfurion to insist on moral boundaries. They were two halves of a whole that could never quite fit together. The Illidari who survive their master carry his legacy forward in the most direct way possible. These demon hunters continue to walk the paths that Illidan blazed, using demonic power to fight demonic enemies. They face the same struggles that Illidan faced, the constant battle to maintain their identity against the demons bound within them. Some succeed where Illidan ultimately succeeded. Others fall as he sometimes fell. All of them are shaped by his example, the demon hunters who emerged from the vault of the Wardens during the Legion's assault on Azeroth proved themselves to be among the most effective warriors in the fight against the demons. Their spectral sight allowed them to perceive threats that other combatants could not see. Their FEL magic cut through demonic defenses that conventional weapons could not penetrate. Their willingness to sacrifice their own humanity to protect others made them invaluable assets in a war that required exactly that kind of extreme commitment. In the years since Illidan's departure to guard Sargeras, the Illidari have established themselves as a permanent faction in Azeroth's political and military landscape. They maintain training grounds where new demon hunters are initiated, passing on the techniques that Illidan developed over millennia of fighting the Legion. They monitor dimensional rifts and watch for signs of demonic activity, ready to respond to threats before they can take root. They serve as Azeroth's first line of defense against the forces of the Twisting Nether, a role they take very seriously. The techniques of demon hunting have evolved since Illidan's time. New generations of demon hunters have refined the methods he pioneered, finding ways to minimize the risks while maximizing the power gained. The mortality rate among initiates has decreased, though it remains significant. The psychological support systems available to demon hunters have improved, helping them maintain their sanity against the constant whispers of their inner demons. Illidan would likely approve of these developments, seeing in them the same pragmatic adaptation that characterized his own approach to warfare. The philosophical debates about the ethics of demon hunting continue in various circles. Some argue that using demonic power to fight demons is inherently corrupting, that no good can come from embracing the darkness. Others point to the effectiveness of demon hunters in combat, arguing that results could justify the methods. Still others take a middle position, acknowledging both the dangers and the benefits while advocating for careful oversight and regulation. These debates will likely continue for as long as demon hunters exist. The imprisonment of Sargeras at the seat of the Pantheon represents Illidan's greatest achievement and his final sacrifice. He chose to spend eternity guarding the most dangerous being in existence, ensuring that the Dark Titan could never threaten Azeroth again. The decision was made in the heat of battle, when the opportunity presented itself and someone needed to act without hesitation. Illidan stepped forward without being asked, volunteering for a duty that no one else could fulfill. In some ways, this final act redeemed all the questionable choices that Illidan had made throughout his long life. The betrayals, the compromises, the willingness to work with evil in pursuit of good, all of it led to this moment where Illidan stood between a Titan and the world he had always sought to protect. His methods had been controversial, his motivations had been questioned, but in the end, he was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what needed to be done. Some scholars believe that Illidan knew this moment would come, that his entire life had been preparation for this final confrontation with Sargeras. The golden eyes that had marked him at birth, the prophecy of greatness that had haunted him throughout his youth, perhaps these had always pointed toward this destiny. Perhaps Illidan had always been meant to be the betrayer, the one who would betray his own nature by becoming exactly what he needed to be to defeat the greatest threat the universe had ever known. This choice was not made out of hope for redemption or desire for recognition, but simply because it was necessary, and Illidan was the one most suited to the task. His hatred for Sargeras was ancient and deep, stretching back to the War of the Ancients when the Dark Titan had first touched his life. That hatred would fuel his vigilance for eternity, ensuring that he never faltered in his watch, never allowed Sargeras to escape his prison. In the end, Illidan Stormrage was exactly what he always claimed to be, someone willing to do whatever was necessary to defeat the Burning Legion. The methods he used were often terrible. The costs he paid were staggering. The pain he caused to himself and others cannot be easily justified. But when the final accounting is made, Illidan stood between Azeroth and annihilation, and Azeroth survived. Whether that makes him a hero or a villain, a savior or a betrayer, is a question that each observer must answer for themselves. The golden-eyed night elf, who loved a priestess he could never have, who was imprisoned for 10,000 years for trying to save his people, who became a demon to fight demons, who died and was reborn and died again in service of a world that never fully accepted him. Illidan Stormrage is too complex for simple labels. He simply was, and Azeroth is forever changed by his existence. Now, as you drift toward sleep, let the story of Illidan settle into your dreams. Perhaps you will see the ancient forests of Kalimdor before the sundering, when night elves danced beneath the stars and the well of eternity shimmered with cosmic power. Perhaps you will witness the war of the ancients, the desperate battle against demonic forces that threatened to consume everything. Perhaps you will follow Illidan through 10,000 years of darkness, through transformation and betrayal and redemption. Consider the journey we have taken together through this vast and epic tale. We began with a night elf child born with golden eyes, marked by destiny before he could even understand what destiny meant. We watched him grow in the shadow of his brother, loving a priestess who loved another, seeking recognition through mastery of arcane magic, while the world around him turned toward other paths. We witnessed his infiltration of the Highborn, his bargain with Sargeras that cost him his original eyes, his role in the desperate final battle at the Well of Eternity. We saw him try to preserve power for his people by creating a new well, saw his brother condemn him for this choice, saw him led in chains to a prison that would hold him for 10,000 years. We followed him through those millennia of darkness, through the endless contemplation of a mind with nothing to occupy it but memories and regrets. We saw him emerge when Tyrande released him to fight the returning legion, saw him claim the skull of Gul'dan and transform into something neither mortal nor demon. We traveled with him across Northrend, witnessed his defeat at the hands of Arthas, followed his flight to Outland, where he would rebuild his power. We saw him create the Illidari, train a new generation of demon hunters, raid the Dreadlord homeworld, and reduce it to rubble. We watched his empire crumble under the assault of those who saw only a threat, not the champion he was trying to be. We saw his death at the hands of Mayav Shadowsong, his imprisonment in the vault of the Wardens, his resurrection when the Legion returned for one final assault on Azeroth. We followed him to Argus itself, watched him reject the light's offer of cleansing, witnessed his participation in the final battle against Sargeras. And at the end, we saw him step forward to become the Eternal Warden, the guardian who would keep Sargeras imprisoned for all time. It was a choice that surprised no one who truly understood Illidan, who saw past the labels and the legends to the being beneath. He had always been willing to sacrifice everything for the chance to defeat the Legion. This was simply the final sacrifice in a lifetime of sacrifices. The night grows deeper now and the tale is complete. The betrayer has found his final purpose, standing eternal guard against the darkness. He stands there still, somewhere beyond the stars, watching over a prison that contains the most dangerous being in existence. The demon hunters carry on his mission on Azeroth, their fell-fire eyes blazing in the shadows as they hunt the remnants of Legion forces wherever they might hide. And Azeroth endures, scarred but surviving, because one complex, flawed, magnificent being refused to stop fighting. The stars wheel overhead in their eternal dance, and somewhere among them, Illidan watches. He watches and waits, patient beyond measure, his attention fixed on the dark titan he has spent eternity hating. Perhaps he thinks sometimes of Tyrande, of the life he never had, of the love that was never returned in the way he wished. Perhaps he remembers his brother, the one who understood him least, but loved him nonetheless, whose path diverged so completely from his own. Perhaps he recalls the forests of ancient Kalimdor, the way the moon shone on the waters of the original well of eternity, the innocence of youth before war and betrayal and 10,000 years of darkness. Perhaps he thinks of the demon hunters who carry on his legacy, the students who became masters in their own right, the warriors who sacrificed their own humanity to protect others from demonic corruption. They are his truest legacy, these men and women who walk the darkest paths so that others do not have to. They understand him in ways that his brother never could, that Tyrande never tried to. They are the inheritors of everything he built, everything he sacrificed for, everything he was. But mostly he watches. That is his purpose now, his reason for existing, and he will fulfill that purpose for all eternity, because that is who Illidan Stormrage has always been, someone who does what must be done, regardless of the cost, the betrayer, the liberator, the eternal warden. All of these titles and more, all of them true, all of them incomplete without the others. Let your breathing slow and your thoughts quiet. The story is over, but the peace it brings can carry you through the night. Feel the weight of the day lifting from your shoulders, the tension draining from your body, the worries of the waking world fading into the background. Illidan's long watch continues at the seat of the Pantheon, and you are safe to rest, knowing that somewhere between the stars, the betrayer stands guard. His vigil is eternal, his purpose unshakable, his resolve absolute. Because of his sacrifice, the darkness cannot reach you. Sleep well, and may your dreams be touched by the light, even as they remember the one who walked in shadow, the one who fell into darkness so that others might stand in the light, the one who sacrificed everything, asked for nothing in return, and found his purpose at the end of all things. Rest now, for you have earned this peace, and the tale of Illidan Stormrage will keep watch over your slumber until the dawn. If you enjoyed this journey through the complete story of Illidan Stormrage, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us create more content exploring the rich and wonderful lore of Azeroth. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts on Illidan's legacy. Was he a hero or a villain? A savior or a betrayer? Perhaps he was something beyond such simple definitions, something that transcends the ordinary categories of morality. Whatever your answer, thank you for spending this peaceful time with us here at World of Sleepcraft. Until next time, rest well, sleep deeply and peacefully, and may all of your dreams tonight be forever filled with wonder and true lasting peace.